Well, hello. Thank you for joining me. We're beginning a new series of studies about Christ in the Crucible. And we want to get right to it. There's a lot of things here, a lot of details, a lot of uh, points to be made in this lesson. And we're going to have some things I think will surprise you, and also a Patreon exclusive for those who want to go into the text in much more depth. I couldn't include them all in the regular broadcast, otherwise it would just take too much time. But for those who are interested, you can become a patron, and we'll go into that. And then you can have the larger uh, and deeper examination. Anyway, the Shepherd's Crucible is the first part of this first lesson, and we're going to start that right away. Well, you may notice that I have the word crucible in quotes for one simple reason. This is a topical study. This whole quarter is a topical study. And we talked about it a little bit before. One of the problems with topical studies is that all the decisions are made for the student before it all begins. And so the author of the lessons has gone through and said, this is a crucible, that's a crucible, and so forth. And you will study in that fashion. But maybe they're not correct, and maybe you don't agree with that. Maybe you find the text doesn't lead you in that direction, and so that's one of the problems of the topical approach, is that all the decisions are made for you, and we're not shown why or how that decision is made, how to decide that this is a crucible. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the Shepherd's Psalm, Psalm 23, and we're going to examine just, is there a crucible in it? Is the whole thing a crucible? What is meant by this time of purification and testing and so forth that takes place in the crucible? And we'll just go right at it with the memory text. And of course, this is one of the most familiar verses in Scripture. And of course, that makes this one of the most difficult types of lessons to teach, because everyone's familiar with it. And I think, it's very easy to think, well, I know that, and everything just sort of, we go over the top of it. But I'm hoping that we can learn some things from this. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his sake. Right off the bat, that doesn't sound much like a crucible. He restores my soul. I'm going to be using Robert Alter's translation, where it says he brings me back to life. That's a marvelous thing. And leading me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And of course, why does he do this? For his name's sake? In the Old Testament, name is character, name is reputation. Do it for your name's sake, so that your character is vindicated. And that's one of the reasons the shepherd leads us in paths of righteousness, so that his name can be vindicated. But part of that is his character. The lies that Satan has told about him from the garden onward is that God doesn't care. And what we're going to see certainly in this psalm is how much God cares as the shepherd, and as there's two sections. There's a section of shepherd and another section as well that we will look at. But they show repeatedly how God meets our fundamental needs. And in that, we can talk about systematic theology, which is how we apply, exegesis is what do the writers say. Biblical theology is what did he believe, how did he understand what he was saying. And systematic theology is what does that mean for us today. And it's systematic theology is where we can come and add things like science and sociology and psychology and physics. All sorts of things can come into play, because they can inform us about the text. Because it's not about what was said then, it's about what was said then and how does it apply today. And when we're talking about meeting human needs, there's a few things better than Abraham Maslow's Heirarchy of Needs. This has been around for quite some time, and it works very well. It's very descriptive. I used it in my teaching in the classroom. I've used it in my work with families. These are really basic truths that Abraham Maslow discovered. And we're going to look at them, that they're often put together in this pyramid. And we're going to just look at them each one. The first level, the bottom level, is physiological. And there comes food and clothing and shelter, all, oxygen, all the things that are necessary for us to survive. Because unless we can survive, nothing happens. And so our very first needs are to make sure that we have the basic things that will allow us to survive. And as soon as we have our meal, but once we know where our next meal is coming from, then we want to be safe. If we see this all the time, if we don't have our fundamental needs, we'll risk a lot in order to meet them, because to not meet them is to die, the physiological needs. But once we have more or less, once we know where the second meal and where our shelter will be, then we want to be safe in it. We want to be able to enjoy that, because it's no good if we don't live through it either. So safety is our second level of needs, and that's very important. And as a classroom teacher, I can tell you one of the problems is that so few classrooms are truly safe. Children don't feel safe. It's not safe to make mistakes. And by the way, churches are too often the same way as well. We're afraid that if we make mistakes, we'll be condemned and we'll be cast out. And so these things really matter. They make a big difference if we understand them, and if we implement them. We help people to, first of all, meet their basic needs. This is one of the reasons that our little church has a snack table. People need to know from the beginning. They will be more relaxed if they know that their needs will be met. If there's there'll be food, there's water, there are restrooms, things that are basic to their needs. And no one is going to be upset if they meet those needs. So that's, physiological. First of all, you have those needs. And secondly, it's safe to partake. The third one is love and belonging. And of course, this is a huge thing when it comes to churches and families. People want to feel like that they matter and that they belong, that they're going to have a place where they can be. And that's meant very graphically and very powerfully in the 23rd Psalm. Now, the next one is the need for esteem, to feel good about ourselves, and to feel that we have value and worth, and be able to, do the things that we're made to do. And finally, self-actualization. And Scripture in general provides for this, but it's not always, it's not here in Psalm 23. In Psalm 23, what we see is the first three levels for certain. And we're going to look at those as we go along and see how the words of this psalm, this poem, give us this kind of certainty and feeling of that our needs will be met and that we'll be safe and that we belong. Those things are really crucial, because until those happen, we aren't going to do it. This is the point that the reason that Maslow came up with this hierarchy of needs is that until we meet our basic physiological needs, we're not going to look at safety. And until we come up with safety, we're not going to look at belonging. And until we feel like we belong, we're not going to meet our esteem needs. And this is why the gifts of the Spirit, for example, come once we become part of the family of God. It's natural then, only when we feel like we belong, when we'll be free to blossom and to express our spiritual gifts and to do those things which God created us to do. So these things matter. And Abraham Maslow was not a Christian, but he found something that was really fundamentally important, and it's very useful. We'll see as we go through the words of this psalm. I said I'm going to have to hurry. There's a lot of material here. It begins this way, David's psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In grass meadows, he makes me to lie down. By quiet waters, he guides me. My life he brings back. He leads me on the pathways of justice for his name's sake. God is a God of justice, so he leads me to be just as well. He's just with his followers, and he leads them to be just with one another, because that is the character of God. And so when we take a look at this, what we see is, I shall not want. In grass meadows, he makes me lie down. That's the food. By quiet waters, he guides me. My life he brings back. These are physiological needs for sheep. They need They need food. They need water. They need a place to rest. Food, clothing, shelter, all of these things. And so physiological, we see this the very first verses. And it's interesting how this works because, of course, this was written thousands of years before Maslow began looking into this. But, of course, God knows what our needs are. And you can see that they're met in a very powerful way here in the first verses of Psalm 23. Now, when we get to the Patreon exclusive, there's all of this stuff. I'm going to go into the entire structure. I'm not going to have time to do it here. There will give you the focus of the structure and so forth. That is for those who want to be part of it. To do that, you can go to my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Bible Journeys. You'll see it at the beginning and end slides here. And you can sign up to be a member at the $5 a month support level, and you'll be able to view the Patreon exclusive. We have a number of them now, and they keep growing. We have lots of material available. Of course, you want to go at the higher levels, you get more detail. You get outlines, you get pictures of the slides, you get the slideshow itself. These things are all available if you want to do that. But we'll give you everything else, everything we can jam in here very quickly. So the first key understanding in Psalm 23, the first key concept of our lesson is, I shall not want. God supplies my physiological needs. And this is really a wonderful thing. Now, obviously, there are times when Christians suffer. We're talking about, the depredations of sin and so forth. But everything being equal, God will supply our physiological needs, and he wants to do this. And when because of sin, he does not or cannot, he is only building us up for later when our treasure is in heaven and in the new earth. We will have our needs met at an unbelievable level, our physiological needs. I shall not want. This is the first thing that the psalmist wants to understand. We won't go begging. We won't go without, because God is looking after us. So that's our first key concept in the Psalm 23. By the way, Psalm 23 is very, very short. I think it's only 6 verses. So it's very short, but it's very simple. And it's justly famous because it is so powerful in these simple but important concepts. Though I walk in the vale of death's shadow, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, it is they that console me. Now, here he's talking about this. We all are going to, from time to time, walk through the vale of death's shadow. And the lesson author says, how did they end up here? How did the sheep end up in this valley? Well, the problem that I have is that this psalm doesn't end up there. You pass through. I walk in that vale, but they move on to the second part of the second half of the psalm. And I say second half, not in terms of the verbiage, but second half in terms of the concepts which are contained therein. So, though I walk in the vale of death's shadow, I fear no harm. I have no reason to fear. For you are with me, your rod and your staff. The rod and the staff, the rod is for rescue. The staff is for rescue. The rod is for punishment and for defense and for, beating off predators and so forth. They cover. We don't have to take care of those things ourselves. Doesn't mean we can be just careless, but it means that in the ultimate sense, God is going to protect us and he's going to rescue us. So knowing that he has these things and is ready to employ them on our behalf, why should we fear? If God be for us, Paul says, who can be against us? Okay, whom then shall I fear? The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom then shall I fear? It's another psalm, but the point is the same. If God is looking after us, God is going to care for us. Yes, this life may end in terrible circumstances, but as Paul says, we count this life as nothing compared with what's available. And there is a peace and a joy which is available to those who serve the Lord. Now, having said this, I want to make it clear. I'm not just giving you bromides, just, there. This is something that we all struggle with. But the struggling isn't um, because God isn't there. The struggling is because we have a hard time in trusting that he's there. We have a hard time in believing that he's there. Because if you were faced with the ultimate sacrifice, but you knew, you felt certain, you believed in your heart that your next breath, if you were killed or something like as the fiery furnace and so forth, if you ended your days immediately, the next thing you would know would be the glories and the luxuries of heaven. And if we really believe that, then there would be no reason to fear. So there's that. And that is the second I shall, and the second key to understanding the 23rd Psalm. I shall not fear. God supplies my needs for safety. God keeps me safe, for he is with me. That's what the Psalm says. I fear no harm because you're with me. And so we see this now. We need not fear harm because God is with me. And that means our safety needs, our physiological needs are met in the first verses. And then immediately we're told that our safety needs will be cared for as well. What a marvelous reassurance we have. And so there's our second key. God supplies my needs for safety, for he is with me. He's with you. Again, this is the problem isn't with God. The problem is believing this. The problem is trusting God. It's the problem that our parents had in Eden. They didn't trust God. They trusted the serpent instead. And the serpent isn't trustworthy. And so we have all these trust issues, all of us. But God wants us and needs us to trust him, and we need to trust him. In fact, we need to trust others as well, even though they won't be trustworthy. I'm not totally trustworthy. My family will tell you. I fail them sometimes. And that's part of Satan's plan, is to make us disappointed so that we will never trust anyone. But any kind of community, or any family, any society is impossible if people do not trust one another. It just can't be. It won't happen. It won't work. Trust is the only way it can work. And we need to learn how to trust one another. As we trust God, we become more trustworthy ourselves. And that helps build and cement and solidify the community of the church and the family of God, and makes us people that others want to join with and want to be part of. Now we come to this fascinating thing. You set a table before me in the face of my foes. In the translation of the King James is in the presence of my enemies. The same idea, right smack in their faces. It's amazing how this happens. I've had this happen. I went to a church where I was abused, actually, spiritually abused. And a speaker came from a higher level on the church, let's say. And in front of this, as he was speaking, he said, "Oh, I see my friend Ed Dickerson out there. I'm so glad he came." That is so affirming, because there were people there who still were very angry with me and still were my foes, but he affirmed me in front of them. That is a big thing, I tell you. It makes a sore heart feel a lot better. And this is what is being talked about. You set a table before me in the face of my foes. You moisten my head with oil, my cup overflows. Now, the King James says anoint, but Alter says the word that's used here is not the one that is commonly used for anointing a king or anointing a prophet, but rather the sense is one of luxury. That, it's like one of those spas or something where they massage your hair with oil. You are made to feel special. The table is set for you. This table set before me in the presence of my foes, and then my head is moistened with oil. You notice how this happens again and again. First of all, he talks about what God does. He speaks to God directly. You set, and then he says, first he says about God, then he addresses God directly. And finally, the end of the psalm, but we got some more work to do here. Let but goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for many long days. Now, you'll notice again, we mention this every time. Lord is in all caps, which means that in the original Hebrew, it's Yahweh. But a good Jew will never say the name of God. They'd say Adonai, which is Lord. And so that's the translator's way of alerting us to the fact that it's God's name, but at the same time not forcing us to say it. So it's a sort of reverential thing. And here it is, not forever, because it is not eternity per se that this psalm has in view. It's just saying that all the days of my life, for many long days, I'll live a long life, I'll live a long life and a happy life. Now, this is, again, God's ideal for us and what he intends for us. We may short-circuit some of these plans, and Satan may come in and short-circuit some of these plans in this life. But this is what God has planned for us. This is what he wants to provide for us. And he will for some. And others will be chosen to have difficulties. But all in all, I think it's fair to say that we do not see a crucible here. The Psalm of 23 is not about the valley of the shadow of death. The Psalm is about God's providence and about God's provision, and it's about God's meeting our needs. That's what Psalm 23 is about. It's not a crucible. It's not a crisis. Now, you may disagree with me. You're free to look at it, but I'm just showing you what I see in the text is that it tells us that we've had, I shall not want, I shall not fear, and now we have soon the final one. But here we have, the table is set for me. I am valued. Few things just make us feel more valued than someone saying, it's, I talk about this when I talk about nurture and about how we help people reach their maximum potential. And one of the things is that we say that acceptance is, you're okay. That's tolerance. Tolerance is much overvalued. Tolerance says, okay, you're here. Oh, it's fine with me, you're here. Go do whatever you want. But acceptance says, here's a place just for you. And approval says we have a place. If you weren't here, it wouldn't be as exciting. It wouldn't be as valuable. It wouldn't be as rewarding. And that's what God says to us, that he approves of us, that he wants us. And here is the expression of it in the Psalms. The table is set for me. I am valued. That's what the psalmist is saying here. The table is set for you, my friend. God has a place just for you. In his house there are many mansions, he says. And when he says, and there's a place for you, we tend to think of it as like a condo or something where all the apartments are the same, but that's not the way it's going to be. God doesn't do that kind of thing. He doesn't make two snowflakes alike. He doesn't make two leaves of a tree alike. He certainly doesn't make two human beings exactly alike. And if he does that, when he provides a mansion for you, it will be just for you. C.S. Lewis says it'll fit like a glove. A hand fits in a glove. Gloves, they have to be pretty good fit before they work at all. And it's made stitch for stitch for you, he says, like a glove. Well, that's when God says that he has a place for you. He's preparing a place for you. He's preparing a place just for you. Just for you. It won't exactly fit anybody else. Nothing wrong with it. Just there's nothing wrong with being different. God is creative. But he won't make us all wear unfitting things that just don't match us. And when he says, I'm going to make a place for you, he means just for you. And that's what's going on here. There's a table setting for you, my friend. And this is one of the best ways of showing belonging. You belong because there's a place right here with your name on it. There's a place right here with what you need. That is what the psalmists say. He sets a table before us in the presence of our enemies. He wants them to see, and he wants us to see that he has prepared it specifically for us because he cares about us, not about us in a generic sense. He cares about you, who you are meant to be, the best you, the happiest you, the you that he created you to be. And that's true for each individual because God is infinite. It's kind of like saying, which one of your children do you love? You love all your children. You love them differently, not because you love one more than another, but because they're different, they're unique, and you enjoy, you luxuriate in their uniqueness. At least I do. I have 3 children. They're amazing. I learn from them every day. I'm delighted that they have become adults who can teach me and guide me, whose advice is valuable to me. And they're not at all the same. There are certain similarities, of course, but they're different. They're very different individuals, and I glory in that. I delight in that. Well, God delights in the differences that he put in each one of us and wants to see us blossom and meet our full potential. And that's what's happening here. The table is set for you specifically. Okay, and that's our third key. I shall. First of all, we had I shall not. Well, we'll look at those 3 in a minute. I shall dwell. The table is set for me. I am valued, and so because there's a place just for me, goodness and mercy will pursue me, and I will live in the Lord's house for many long days. This is the view of the psalmist. And of course, we know that eventually there will be many long days. There'll be an infinite number of days. There will be eternity that we will dwell in God's house. And that's exactly what it will be, because this earth was designed to be God's temple, and his rulership over the universe was to take place from here. And that's certainly borne out in Revelation in the final chapters. So I shall dwell. The table's for me. I'm valued. I'm home. It's interesting. One time when we were traveling, my wife and I, we traveled to Canada. I had a speaking appointment. And when we came back, we'd spent about a week, I think it was, in Canada. We came back to the border, and the American customs official said, "Welcome home." And that was very nurturing. Welcome home. Well, that's what God says to each and every one of us. Welcome home. And that's what we feel immediately when we sit at the Lord's table, the table that has been set for us, saying, welcome home. We're at home. Oh, I belong here. I want to be here. So you see, the Psalm 23 has methodically gone through and met those basic needs, the needs for physiological. We have the food, the water, the rest, the various things that we need. And the safety needs. We're safe because he has his rod and his staff, and he protects us even though we go through the veil of death, the shadow of death. And now we have belonging. I shall dwell. I am valued. And now, for those who are patrons, I'm going to do the Patreon exclusive. And the most important part of this psalm. But as we come here to the end, we have those 3 keys already talked about. And the whole point of the psalm is I shall not want. God supplies my physiological needs. I shall not fear, because God supplies my needs for safety, for he is with me. We just talked about how important that part of the verse is. And I shall dwell, because the table is set for me. There is a place just for me. I am valued. Wow. What an amazing thing in this tiny psalm. If you didn't appreciate Psalm 23, which is rare, most people do anyway, but I hope that this has given you an even deeper appreciation for seeing the importance and the beauty of this psalm. Now, as I've said, if you want to become a patron, You can go to, you can see at the bottom of the page there, www.patreon.com/Bible Journeys, and you have several opportunities to sign up, and there's a lot of material that I make available only for patrons. If you sign at the $5 level, you get one level of service. At the 10, you get more, and 20, and so forth. So it's up to you what you want. But I try to make plenty available. There's at least 16 new posts, I think, every month now, and there will be more. So if you want to ask me questions, or if you want to any more to inquire about this, you can reach me at BibleJourneys@yahoo.com. That's my email. So thank you for being with me, and I hope that this has helped you build your faith. And I hope that you can be with me again in a few days as we embark again together on another Bible journey.